Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a book review on The Legacy of the Watchers series by Nancy Madore. In The Legacy of the Watchers series by Nancy Madore, Nadia is CEO of a thriving charitable foundation. But one day she is kidnapped by three strange men who think she has some sort of connection to the notorious demoness of Hebrew legend, Lilith. These men seem to believe that a terrorist attack is about to happen involving supernatural forces, and it's up to Nadia to re examine the stories she heard about her grandmother and her mother to search for the whereabouts of Lilith to stop this impending disaster. Okay, so this is a trilogy of books by Nancy Madore. The first book in the series is called The Hidden Ones, and then book 2 is called Power of Gods, and then book 3 is Masquerade. And I do need to have a quick disclaimer here at the top of this video because these books have been lying around on my shelves, you guys, I think since 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm so embarrassed and so apologetic about this because way back in 2014, Nancy Madore very kindly sent me an email asking if she can send me this trilogy and if I could read and review it for her on my channel. I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do it. And then just the things started happening. This is when my book buying just started getting a little outrageous and ridiculous, and I was having trouble just keeping up with certain things. And unfortunately, this trilogy that Nancy Madore so very kindly sent me, it just kind of fell to the side. And I'm just so apologetic and embarrassed about that. Like I said, she sent these to me expecting a review. It never came, but hey, better late than never, right? So yeah, Nancy Madore, I don't know if you're watching this, but if you are, once again, I'm sorry, and yeah, better late than never. A review is better than no review, am I right? So as I'm getting into my review for this trilogy, there are going to be no spoilers. I'm going to stay away from spoilers as best I can. I'm just going to do like an overall general kind of consensus of what I felt about this trilogy. What are the highs and lows of it, whether it's for you or not. And my individual reviews for these books are up on Goodreads. So if you do want to hear more I guess, in-depth thoughts, I definitely recommend heading over to my Goodreads to read the individual reviews, because I'm definitely going to try to keep this as just short and concise as I can and just give an overview of the trilogy. So yeah, this trilogy, overall, I liked this trilogy. I didn't like love it. It wasn't like a mind-blowing trilogy, but I did really like it. I did find it to be entertaining and engaging, and I did like the characters for the most part. I liked the overall general plot. Yeah, this trilogy has a lot to do with this woman named Nadia. She's CEO of this charitable company. She basically helps people when disaster strikes. Her company is a charity for disaster relief victims, essentially. So yeah, one day she's kidnapped by these three strange men. They think that she is Lilith, yeah, guys, Lilith of Hebrew legend, who I think a lot of people, when they hear Lilith, they think of like a villainess, a demoness. A lot of times she's quoted as being like the wife of Adam before Eve, correct? Am I correct in saying that? So these men, they quickly kind of realize, okay, Nadia, she's not a demoness, they kind of thought she was because they work for like a behind the scenes government agency and whatnot. So the research that they did on her, and when they were lurking into her background and her history, the kind of the threads that they were weaving together, they kind of started thinking that she was possibly Lilith, that she was possessed by Lilith, but no, she's not. So what happens in the very first book in this series, Nadia has to basically tell her whole life story to these three strange men, talk about her mother, and more than anything, talk a lot about her grandmother, and things that kind of transpired that go back to like the 1940s and whatnot, that do deal with with Lilith. And the reason that these men kidnapped Nadia to begin with, they believe there was some sort of supernatural terrorist attack about to happen. So Nadia happens to just have maybe the clues that they need, that they can stop this terrorist attack before it happens, because they think these what they call jinn, that are like kind of like the Nephilim of biblical legend, you know, they kind of think that the jinn are coming to take over the world and this and that. So yeah, this book deals a lot with history, specifically biblical history, and I really kind of liked what Nancy Madore did with that history. She was kind of doing a retelling in a sense. Like this first book, there's like a huge retelling because you get Lilith's story, but within Lilith's story, you kind of get up to the Great Flood, you know, when Noah makes his ark. How does that come about? Why does it come about? What is Lilith's role within that story, you know? So there's a lot of interesting retellings of, kind of, if you are familiar with stuff from the Bible, how that's kind of weaved into the history of this, and what Nancy Madore does with her own kind of unique retellings of those. And yeah, all of the books in the trilogy are like that. This one definitely focusing on kind of leading up to the Great Flood, Noah's Ark and whatnot. And I guess what you can call this trilogy, the best way to kind of think about this trilogy, it's kind of like a blend of a little bit of historical fiction in places, plus like a political thriller sort of book, and kind of a little bit of Dan Brown at there. And if you like things like the Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons and whatnot, you know, this book is kind of a nice little blending of genres. Like I said, a little bit of historical fiction here, a little bit of political thriller elements over here, a little bit of like Dan Brown over here. You know, it's kind of like that treasure hunt sort of atmosphere and feel to it. As far as the pacing of these books, I do think they read fairly quickly. I don't think there was ever a moment in these books that I was like bored or I felt like anything was dragging. I do think the one big downside of all three books, this is kind of my one big huge negative with all three books, I feel like the characters, they spend like over half of the book like in one location, if you get what I mean. Like they spend like in a house. They'll spend the whole book like in a house doing research and kind of re-examining things and talking to each other about, you know, future threats, and hey, I'm kind of suspicious of this person, you know. And they spend a good chunk of all these books just kind of in one specific location, and they don't really branch out too terribly much, which can kind of be a little frustrating, because it's like I want a little bit of like more action adventure in these books. You know, there's not really too much action adventure in a sense. A lot of the action adventure elements take place more maybe in the last 25% of every book, where all the really good stuff gets going, and kind of more of the supernatural aspects. Because yeah, the majority of the books really go back and forth between whatever's going on with Nadia and her kidnappers, and then, yeah, whatever the flashback things are. In this first book specifically, it's with the character of Lilith, telling her backstory. So that is kind of my one big frustration. I wish there was kind of a bit more, especially with Nadia's story. Sometimes Nadia's story in all three books felt very stagnant and wasn't moving very much. Like, we were getting a lot of information because the characters are doing a lot of research and whatnot, but still, they're not really moving too much and going out there. Each book, it does get a little progressively better and better because things are building and getting bigger and bigger. Just elements and supernatural occurrences, things are getting a little bit bigger and bigger as you go in each book. But still, a lot of times I felt like Nadia was very stagnant, and I felt like a lot of times she was kind of absorbing information rather than kind of going out there and doing something with the information. And sometimes too, when you would get to some really good stuff in these books, sometimes I felt like the good stuff would get abruptly, just dramatically cut. And it's like, wait, I want to go back to that. Go back to that, Nancy Madore, please. And then as far as the characters are concerned, I did like the characters. I did wish they were a little bit more fleshed out. I think the characters in all three books that had like flashback sequences, I think a lot of those characters were pretty well developed. Like Lilith in this first book, like, I think Lilith had the better, far away, best story and whatnot. Nadia, as I kind of said, she feels like a very stagnant character in some ways. I still liked Nadia. I didn't really find anything to dislike about her. And then her men, who are her kidnappers, who I kind of felt like she formed a bit of Stockholm syndrome with eventually over the course of the first book. I liked her kidnappers, as weird as a sentence as that sounds, but they're not bad guys at all. They just kind of thought they were doing what they need to do to save the future of the world, you know. I do like the men that Nadia spends the majority of her time with. Two of the men I feel like Nancy Madore spends a lot of time with over the course of all 3 books. And then the third guy is Nadia's crush, her love interest, if you will, over the course of all 3 books. And I feel like you never really get a good sense of her love interest. He also kind of feels really stagnant. And he doesn't really move too terribly much, which is kind of weird. It's like, this is the love interest I'm supposed to be invested in, but why exactly? And I mean, after all, this guy was part of the kidnapping plot as well. It's a little weird in this first book how quickly the romance kind of blooms between the two of them. That's why I add some Stockholm syndrome in there. But yeah, the characters are fine. I did like them. I think Nancy Madore has some nice, like, comedic moments with them that kind of livens and freshens up the air, you know, because there's a lot of heavy dramatic stuff going on. Overall, this trilogy was fine. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I did find it entertaining and engaging. I am a little confused because the final book, it definitely ends in a cliffhanger. You guys, there are definitely some loose ends that Nancy Madore does not get to. And the last book, the final page of the book, it does say that there's like a 4th book that's supposed to have come out. But I searched all over Goodreads. I looked on Nancy Madore's author website and everything. There is just absolutely nothing in regards to a 4th book. The series, if you do read it, the 3rd book is going to kind of abruptly end, and you're going to be left with some questions and lingering threads and what's going to happen to the future of these characters. So that's kind of a little frustrating after you've spent 3 books with these characters, just have it end. And yeah, it says there's a 4th book, but yeah, there's never been one. I honestly do not know what happened to the 4th book. What happened there? But yeah, I guess the best way to recommend these books, if you do kind of like a little sprinkling of like historical fiction and Dan Brown and political thrillers and action, a little bit of action adventure, you know, this book kind of has a lot of stuff kind of weaved together, telling a nice little interesting story that kind of relates back to like biblical history and what does that do in terms of like what's going on in our current. And yeah, the people who are kind of abusing and using these jinn, like I said, the jinn are kind of like these Nephilim creatures from biblical legend. Yeah, the government kind of doing some stuff. There's a lot of government like conspiracies going on in this whole trilogy and whatnot, what they're up to, because people have nefarious reasons and purposes for what they're doing. So yeah, if any of that sounds interesting and compelling to you, I definitely recommend checking this out. It might be your cup of tea. But yeah, I did like these books for what they were. I do definitely thank Nancy Madore for sending them to me way back in 2014. Oh my god. So you guys, that is it for this book review. In the comments below, have you guys read this trilogy? Do you plan on reading it? Just let me know your thoughts down below. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye guys.